Hello and welcome back to Game Review. My name is Caleb Denby, and today I wanted to do something a little bit different. Instead of going over a professional game or a classic game from history, I wanted to go over an amateur game, specifically my amateur game. I think it's very instructive to see how the top players play, but also sometimes it's more practical to see how an amateur level player approaches the game and how one player ends up winning over another. So in this game, I was playing a 2000 rated player by the name of Griffin Thomas McConnell, and we played d4, knight f6, c4, e6, knight c3, bishop b4, reaching a Nimzo-Indian defense. I chose the f3 variation, which is my general go-to. We see d5 from black, one of the main options. After a3, takes, b6, c takes d5, e takes d5, and e3. We reach a position which is quite similar to a game we've gone over earlier in the series between Botvinnik and Capablanca. And in that Botvinnik and Capablanca game, black plays this move, bishop a6. Well, okay, not right away. First castles, bishop d3, and then something like bishop a6. It is a main way of playing and approaching this opening. And the reason for that is for a reason I've said before. In structures like this, where a c3 pawn is supporting d4, this light squared bishop is a very, very powerful attacker of the king's side. So very often, black will want to trade off this bishop for the light squared bishop of white's. And that really holds true here. And this is really the only way to kind of develop this light squared bishop for black. There's no other good square for it. And we'll see that this is a very serious mistake that my opponent made in this game. In the game, he played queen e7. A move that doesn't really make a ton of sense. He is eyeing this e-pawn, which could be described as weak, but the fact is it has plenty of defense with this bishop on c1. So I continued developing, quite simply. And now my opponent made the real mistake, which was bishop b7. By committing this bishop to the b7 square, it might seem like you're preventing e4, but the nature of the position is such that white can always get e4 in eventually. You know, you can bring enough pieces over to the center to support this e4 break, and it's going to come through, no matter what. So it's much, much better to trade this bishop off for this bishop, rather than bring it to b7. Of course, you do have to castle first. Everybody should know this tactic. Bishop a6, I'll let you try and find the win for white. Of course, bishop takes a6, knight a6, with a fork. So that's one to avoid. But black could simply castle here, and then follow that up with bishop a6. Instead though, queen b7, knight e2, knight b d7, and already this is kind of mistake number 2 for black. Of course, in this opening, as I've mentioned before, black's play is going to come on the queen's side, with moves like especially c5 and knight c6, and an eventual expansion of probably a6 and b5 and b4. This is how black wants to find counterplay. And instead, black brings this knight to from b8 to d7. There's just no future for this knight. There's no home that it can reach from the d7 square. And it's not really contributing to the play in the center. And this is the first topic I wanted to talk about with this game. In a lot of amateur level games, you're told, develop your pieces, castle your king, and you can't go wrong in the opening. When you are unfamiliar with the opening, you should rely on these principles to kind of guide you through the complications. And while that holds true, once you reach a certain point, it's not enough. And so I wanted to add the rule to develop your pieces. I wanted to add to it with a purpose. You need to develop your pieces with a purpose. You can claim on d7 is a developed piece. It's off the back rank. But the fact is, a piece is only really developed if it's contributing to the game. That's the point in developing your pieces. You want them to contribute, to be a part of the action. And from d7, this knight simply does not do that. So that was black's big mistake in this game, is developing his pieces, but developing them so haphazardly that they don't really serve a good purpose. And that makes all the difference in this position. That being said, when your opponent does something strange, you don't always need to punish it immediately. I simply castle, black simply castles as well. And I let the position kind of speak for itself. You don't need to try really, really hard to refute play like this. You just need to follow your plan and improve your position. So my plan is to play e4. I play knight g3, supporting this break. This rook comes to e8. I play rook a2. This is kind of a common maneuver, nicknamed the Machuca rook here at the St. Louis Chess Club, where you lift the rook up one square and then bring it over to the action on the other side of the board. Now my opponent tries to justify putting this knight on d7 by bringing it to f8, where it can see some of these squares, but really, from these squares, it also isn't doing enough in the game. I bring this rook to the center to support this e4 break. Black plays c5, trying to slow down e4 by pressuring d4, but Black has simply wasted too much time by moving this knight all the way to f8, moving this rook to e8, and so the fact is, I can play my plan without too much difficulty here. And at this point, white is simply completely winning. It's more than +3 already, which might be surprising to you, but this is not the type of opening where you can waste your time moving your pieces back and forth. And because of that, this game very, very quickly got out of Black's hands. We see pawn takes d4, pawn takes d4, pawn takes e4, pawn takes e4, and after queen d7, it's really, really tough to find a move for Black. Queen d7 looks a little bit strange. It does make a threat, but like I said, I mean, it's very difficult to find a playable move for Black. So of course, my pawn's attacked. I simply defend it. There's no rush in White's position here. All of my threats are going to be permanent, and there's no good way to solve these problems for Black. In the game, my opponent chose knight g6, and here I'll allow you viewers at home to try and find the absolute crushing move for White here. There's a move that just puts Black away immediately and pretty much ends the game. Okay, hopefully you found it. The move is, of course, the wonderful sacrifice rook takes f6. This is the key move here. It rips open Black's kingside, and after Black would recapture, you have this move, knight h5, eyeing this f6 pawn, threatening to fork no fewer than 3 pieces. If Black wants to try to defend, we can now play d5, unveiling this bishop from b2, and really, really putting Black out of the game. Here, you have a couple options. Of course, you could capture this if you wanted. Black would be forced to take to save the queen, but I think more powerful is simply queen d2, with the idea of coming into checkmate Black. So rook takes f6 is a very nice move that would have ended the game on the spot. In the game, I was feeling a bit lazy. I didn't want to calculate rook takes f6, so I played queen d2, hoping for an improved version where I could bring the queen to h6 immediately following rook takes f6. Seeing this coming, Black probably should have tried a move like knight g4 to try and keep this rook takes f6 from not occurring, but at the end of the day, it's not going to be enough. A move like h3 will make this knight move again, and now after bishop c1, this knight is really trapped, and this structure is going to become fractured anyways. So in the game though, my opponent played rook a d8, a fairly nonchalant move, when in fact now rook takes f6 is game ending. I continued with queen h6, and now one final test for you at home. If queen g4, what is the move for White? Only one move wins. Okay, is it knight f5? No, it is not knight f5. While this is good for White, it's only about +1. Black's threat is to play knight f4 when he can defend this quite adequately. So we have to do better than knight f5. We have to make a second threat, and that is exactly what knight h5 does. Threatens knight takes f6, winning a queen, and queen g7, winning the king. You might be thinking, well, what if Black tries to sidestep both threats with the move king h8? Well, sorry, not king h8. Wait a second. Okay, so if king h8 here, still knight h5 is the line I was thinking of. Now if rook g8 to try to stop it, knight f6 once again wins the game. And so as well, in this knight h5 line, there's simply no way to stop both of these threats. In the game, my opponent tried knight f4, throws away a knight for a tempo. I take it. He plays queen back to e7, and now I just bring this knight to f5. And this is where my opponent decided to throw in the towel. So this was a pretty simple game, actually. There was that key tactic with rook takes f6. The takeaway to keep in mind from this game is that you don't want to develop without a purpose, because you can very quickly find yourself in a position where your pieces are uncoordinated and none of them are really contributing to the game. So always develop with a purpose. With that in mind, thank you once again for joining me for today's game review. My name is Caleb Denby, and I will see you in the next episode.